Dr Monaghan.
Madam Deputy Speaker, one of the first actions that I took following my election to this place was to highlight the plight of those infected with contaminated blood in the 1970s and 1980s. I did this by writing to the Department of Health following discussions that I had had with Julie, my constituent. In July 2015, I also raised Early Day Motion 334 to recognise the ongoing hardship and challenges faced by those infected with contaminated blood, and to encourage the Prime Minister to implement promised arrangements to distribute the additional £25 million to those affected as soon as practicable. Infected blood is one of the most terrible chapters in the history of the NHS. Many people have died or suffered long-term disability and hardship as a result of infection. Relatives have had to sacrifice careers to provide care and support. In some cases, partners and loved ones have become infected. Patients, families and carers have dealt with those difficulties with immense and enduring courage. My constituent, Julie, was born with a rare genetic condition known as Ehlers-Danlos syndrome that requires treatment, including blood transfusions. She was infected with contaminated blood in 1974, 42 years ago, while a young woman with her whole life ahead of her. Following a transfusion in September of that year, she very quickly developed symptoms of hepatitis and suffers today from a range of chronic and debilitating health conditions that have rendered her unable to remain upright for more than 10 minutes at a time before becoming fatigued due to liver and lung damage arising directly from the transfusions that she had. Although now living in Scotland, Julie was infected in England. The liability of the current ex gratia schemes are based on where the individual was infected rather than residency. This means that it is the English schemes and the consultation recently launched by the Honourable Member for Battersea that are responsible for supporting Julie and delivering the financial support that she will require. Julie is currently classed as skipped in stage 1. She has received an ex gratia payment of £20,000 but receives no annual award. Julie's particular medical condition means that she has great difficulty meeting the qualifying criteria for stage 2 that would increase her ex gratia payment and provide approximately £15,000 per annum in badly needed support. I've reviewed Julie's correspondence with the Skipton Fund on this reassessment and find that the fund has been unhelpful, perhaps even deliberately obtuse.
Well, my honourable friend,
I
thank you, my honourable friend, for giving me the opportunity to raise the case of my constituent, Susan Webster, who lost her partner Charlie almost 5 years ago after he contracted hepatitis C following contaminated blood, leaving her and their now 14-year-old daughter without any financial support. Since Charlie's death, Susan and her daughter have received little or no government help whatsoever and have had to approach the Skipton Fund themselves. And today they remain in a state of limbo while the government dithers on the future of the UK scheme. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the government, having dragged its heels for years on this issue, must now act to support the survivors of this scandal without any further delay?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I absolutely agree with him. It's a tragic case that he's outlined, and I'll come to the very specific point that he has made shortly in my speech. On the 21st of January 2016, the Health Minister stated the UK Government wants to increase the amount of money on offer for victims of infected blood by £100 million, in addition to £25 million announced in March 2015 by the Prime Minister. This takes the total to £225 million over the 5 years to 2020. As we know, there is a 12-week consultation on these proposals, which closes this week on the 15th of April. However, the proposed payment schemes have been heavily criticised by many of those affected for being outdated and confused in structure. That is my experience of them also. They also appear unfair. The UK Government has projected a further £570 million will be spent by the Department of Health over the projected lifetime of the reformed scheme. However, analysis shows that the Department of Health wants to cap annual payments for victims in England at £15,000, payments that will no longer be index linked and so will not increase with the cost of living. The UK Government also wants to remove regular discretionary payments, including the winter fuel allowance and the £1,200 child annual payment. Indeed, yeah.
Valid point regarding the cost of living. I've got several constituents who's in the same situation as yours, really. And one of them suggested that shouldn't pension payments be increased to at least the level of the living wage? I wondered what you thought about that.
I would absolutely support that suggestion. And I would note as well that, in fact, many victims in England face cuts now of up to £7,000 per year, together with cumulative losses from the freezing of fixed annual payments to patients at £15,000 a year, time-limited support for partners and spouses after patients' deaths, and the ending of help for children and parents of those affected. Moreover, victims will no longer have access to grants for support with such things as mobility issues and modifications to property, nor will they have access to free expert advice. The Haemophilia Society, who campaign for victims of this scandal, have said that they have deep concerns about the proposals for England, and they have compared those proposals to Scotland, saying concerns are compounded by the fact that similar proposals in Scotland offer more generous payments to its affected community. There is a risk that if both sets of proposals are accepted as they currently stand, that affected people in England will receive much lower levels of income than those in Scotland. The Scottish Government has already provided £32 million over the last 10 years to the current UK-wide schemes, so are already committed to supporting those infected in Scotland. Nevertheless, on 18th of March this year, the Scottish Government announced a substantial package of increased financial support for those affected by infected NHS blood and blood products in Scotland, amounting to an additional £20 million over the next 3 years alone. The new Scottish scheme will see annual payments for those with HIV and advanced Hep C nearly double from £15,000 a year to £27,000 a year. And for those infected with both HIV and Hep C, they will have their annual payments increased from £30,000 to £37,000. Indeed.
Pure inquiry. Would it have been open to the Scottish authorities to have said that the compensation increased levels would be available to all those within Scotland who were infected rather than where they had gained the infection?
Is possible because it would be an admission of liability, and these schemes are ex gratia schemes with no liability in response to the payment. In addition to the measures that I've already explained, a new support and assistance grant scheme will be established in Scotland to administer and provide more flexible grants to cover additional needs. Scottish Government funding for this scheme will be increased from £300,000 to £1 million per year. In real terms, Madam Deputy Speaker, the new arrangements will mean additional financial support is available for all categories of infected people and their dependents in Scotland. In Scotland, we are clear that this is not the end of the process and that there will be ongoing work with patient groups on this matter. In overwhelming contrast to the Scottish Government, the UK Government are actually proposing to cut funding for victims of this scandal, leaving vulnerable people thousands of pounds a year worse off. It is extremely disappointing that the UK Government do not think it important to support those that were infected in England, and clear that the proposed cuts demonstrate that the UK Government's priorities lie with austerity, not with the victims of this terrible scandal. It's time for the UK Government to support those with lives ruined by this unprecedented scandal. For people like Julie, anything less literally heaps insult on injury.
Peter Heaton-Jones.